Hello world, I'm Nick Proud and welcome to episode 2 of the RPA Show, the show where we discuss the varying topics in robotic process automation. Today the show is brought to you by NexBotix. NexBotix is a managed service for robotic process automation. It's actually the company that I work for. I'm their lead developer, and we try to bring you the full package in terms of discovery, process mining, translation of your business rules into an overall automated process with pay-as-you-go and consumption pricing models, and a web portal with the ability to give you analytics and human intervention in all of your automations. If you want to see more information about how NexBotix can help you to realise your automation potential, head over to www.nexbotix.com. Let's get on with the show. So today we're going to talk about the various different use cases that can be found in robotic process automation. So there's a lot of different business processes out there, and I think it's useful to try and narrow down some of the really probably more prominent use cases that are out there. So I've sort of whittled them down to 5 key areas. The first one being finance and accounting. So this is a really big area for automation, and it's kind of not a new thing to employ automation in this sector. So I think the finance world has been one of the first sectors to really get into automation, and robotic process automation in particular. So I'm going to use the more specific use case of invoice processing. So this is something that I'm quite experienced with, especially with my work at NexBotix. We spend a lot of time processing invoices, taking invoices and extracting them, and essentially fulfilling the accounts payable process, making sure that our suppliers get paid on time in a way that is faster than humans can do it and more effective than humans can do it. So a typical use case for invoice processing. So as we talked about in the previous episode, what is RPA, we kind of gave an overview of how the bots are laid out and how they're deployed. But if you didn't see that episode, head over to it. You'll get a good overview of how we deploy bots in the wild, so to speak. So assuming that you've got some basic understanding of how the bots operate, we configure a bot so that it will pick up a document, and that document is going to be an invoice. So we'll probably start off with Outlook, maybe email, or maybe we're picking up an invoice from a file directory. It doesn't really matter too much. It's anywhere that a human could pick it up or that an automated process could pick it up. It could be an FTP drive, an FTP server, sorry. It really doesn't matter. We could even download the invoices from a website, so that's the entry point to this automation. We're picking up a document. That document could be an invoice in a PDF format. It could be an image. It could be a Word document. So we've obtained the document. The bot has picked up the document, and now it needs to be able to extract some key elements from that document. So what would those key elements be? Well, it really depends on your use case, but in most situations, if we're processing an invoice for payment, we're going to want the invoice ID, we're going to want the line items, the date of payment, we're going to want to know how much each line item costs individually, we're going to want to know how much tax we need to pay. So we need a way of taking specific fields out of this document so that we can use them for the automation. How do we do this? Well, the key technology for this area is what we call optical character recognition, or OCR for short. And there are lots of different systems out there that we can use in RPA to do this. One of the ones that I'm more experienced in using is a solution from Microsoft called Form Recognizer that allows us to leverage Microsoft's fantastic AI capabilities to receive a document and then draw from it specific fields, whether that's the invoice ID or the net total, whatever it needs to be. And there are obviously lots of different other solutions as well besides Microsoft. There's a very well-known OCR solution called Abby, which has been around for some time. Amazon has got its own service called Textract. So we really are sport for choice in terms of OCR capabilities. So assuming we've selected an OCR technology, we've extracted the elements from the document, what do we need to do next? Well, for this use case, we're potentially going to be inserting some data into a system. A lot of customers of ours use pieces of software like SAP, for example, these business grade enterprise applications, which are the purpose of which is for inserting invoice data. That is usually someone, a human being, who is taking the data from the invoice and doing that data entry. So the bot's going to do that for us. So using SAP as an example, the bot is going to use what's called a UI automation. And this is where it will control an application in the same way a human being would. So it's going to open SAP, our finance application, but that could be something else like QuickBooks, it could be Xero accounting, doesn't really matter for this use case. The only thing we need to focus on is the fact that it's going to open up the application in the same way a human would. So we'll automatically see the application start up. We will log in if we need to. So the bot will type in some credentials, username and password. It'll open that up and then it will navigate to the appropriate screen. And so now if we can imagine we've got a screen in front of us where we would normally, as the human, insert the data. So now the bot has the data that it's extracted and it has the window open that it needs to have open in order to insert the data. So it's going to take that data that it's extracted and start typing it in. And you really would see this happening on the screen in the same way that a human being would be doing it. So again, we're in this area of emulating the actions of a human. So we've inserted the data, we've probably clicked confirm or authorize or whatever needs to happen next in that application. And then essentially we've inserted the data. And from here we could do lots of different things. We could pass the invoice on to somebody else to authorize. We could actually log into online banking and make a transfer to a supplier. Really anything that a human could do in this scenario, the bot could do too, because we can control an automation. We can control the UI automatically. The way we do this is by, as we're developing the automation, we're pinpointing the different UI elements. So they could be an OK button, it could be a text box, and we're saying to the bot at this point, take this data. So imagine it's an invoice ID. Take that variable, that string, and do a type into action, and it will type into that box. And then we'll move on to the next command, and that could be clicking OK. So it really is anything that you could do as a human. Other things that we could have in this process are approval processes. So with invoice processing in particular, there's a lot of different hoops you have to jump through usually. There's layers of bureaucracy that have to be followed, and it's very likely that someone in a position of authority will need to approve the invoice for payment. So we can't discount the fact that a lot of the times with finance processes, a human has to intervene or a human has to be involved. That's one of the things we've been working on at NexBotix. We've created a web application which the bot can post to say, I've done this process, it's complete, I just need a human to approve it for me. And then the human can see the original document in the web application. They can see what was extracted. They can see a log of what happened from the bot's point of view, the process it got to at that point. And then they've got a simple button that they can click, approve, and it will carry on with the rest of the process. So we've tried to bridge that gap between the human and the bot. And so that's another element that you could leverage. There's always a way of bringing a human into the loop. So that's a very basic invoice processing example, and I think it encompasses some key elements of RPA, which are 1, OCR, optical character recognition, which is applicable to any kind of document processing, where we extract data from specific elements of a document, and then UI automation, which is where we control the mouse clicks, the keystrokes, that would be normally carried out by a human being in order to achieve the same result. Other ways we could meet the same goal, alternatives, could be using an API. So it might be that an accounting software like Xero, for example, has an API that we could leverage. And the benefit of doing this is that we can kind of go through the back door, so to speak. We don't have to do the clicks and the keystrokes that a human would have to do that tend to slow things down. So there's another area, another alternative there in the form of an API. So moving on to a second use case for today, it's HR, and in particular, employee onboarding. This is a really interesting area for automation, and it's not as mature as the invoice processing use case, but it's starting to catch on. This is the idea that the processes that have to be carried out in order to bring somebody into the business could be automated by a bot. Now, The difficulty around this process, or the complexity around this process, is that the processes, the way the business rules between different companies are radically different. So one company may have a very specific way of onboarding an employee compared to another company. And this is where RPA fits in really well, because standardized software packages will probably try to make a business follow a very specific rule set. There'll be a standard way of doing things that software wants you to follow, a standard rule set. Whereas with RPA, because it's so customizable, we can create a bespoke automation. The bot will simply follow the commands that we tell it to follow. So the important part of this use case is first establishing what are the key business processes that are involved in bringing an employee into the business. Do they need to have a key card to get into the building? Are they fully remote and therefore need to have some equipment dispatched to them? Do we need to contact IT and request a user be created for them? Or better still, do we need to automatically create a user? So there's a bit more discovery that probably goes into a HR employee onboarding process. So assuming then we've established the different business processes that need to happen, we can then tackle them step by step. So for our use case, if we say an email needs to go to Kevin in logistics to get a key card, that's just the process we follow at the moment. Well, that's a very simple process that doesn't really need a human to carry it out. If we have a starting point that has the name of the employee and their details, that can be picked up in the same way that it can be picked up from the invoices we were talking about in the first use case. So we can start off with that employee information, which might be in a database or it might be in a document. The bot can pick that up, extract it, and it can then say, okay, I've got this new employee. I'm going to email Kevin automatically with a template message that says, a key card is required for this person, or it could email a form off to Kevin. It doesn't really matter. So it could start that process off by saying, I've sent an email off requesting a key card. Then it could say, I'm going to automatically set up a user in Windows for that user. So there may be some collaboration with the IT team to say, let's have the bot then log into our server, security permitting, of course, and it will then go into what we call Active Directory, and it will create a new user, and it will validate that the user has all the relevant permissions and everything they need to get started. So that's the next phase of the process that could be carried out. And that could be facilitated with a UI automation that's probably developed by an RPA developer and then tested by one of the IT team to make sure it follows all of their practices. Following this, there could be an order for a mobile phone that happens. So you may log into a supplier's website and then fill in an order form. And so that's another web automation or UI automation where the bot would simply take specific data and fill in a form with it, facilitating the order process. The bot could also then take the results of all these automations, so any emails that Kevin sends back with details of the key card or IT email in with the user details, and it could email that to the new starter before they've even started. So they arrive on day one and the bot has already given them most of the details they need to get started, and then they can just concentrate on their orientation or their induction for the day. So again, considering the fact that the bot can do UI automation, which means anything that a human can click or type on, and it can also leverage email to notify people of changes, we can quite easily facilitate an onboarding process for a new starter. The difficulty, as I said at the beginning, is just establishing those bespoke business processes that come with HR in different companies. The third use case is in retail, and this is specifically around managing inventory. So this is quite a popular area for automation, and specifically around ordering supplies when they're starting to become depleted. So this is quite a simple automation to happen, to create. So in most cases, with inventory management, the inventory is already in some kind of database, or on a very basic level, it may be in a spreadsheet. And a spreadsheet just being another kind of database. And so in most cases, what the bot would do in this use case would start with querying the database and checking the inventory. So what you would want to happen is you would have the bot check the database for specific items that are below an agreed threshold. So say, for example, you've got a warehouse and it has 2,000 sinks. You're selling bathroom supplies, and you want to have a business rule that says when the amount in the inventory goes below 500 in the warehouse, we need to order some more. And the order process is a simple email to a supplier. It's quite an informal business arrangement. You're a small company. You've got a supplier that sells you some sinks at wholesale prices, and the order process is simply send them an email with the amount that you need, and they reply with an invoice. So what the bot will do first is, as I said, it will check the database or the spreadsheet, and it will say, get me the amount of sinks in the inventory at the moment. And then it will use what we call conditional logic, which means evaluating if something is true or false. And it will say, if sink count, or if the total sinks equals below 500 or any agreed threshold, then run this process. And that process is send an email to Tom over at United Sinks Inc. and send a standardized ordered form for sinks. Simple as that. It's obviously probably going to have a little bit more complexity for a lot of different business cases, but from a high level, inventory management is usually about ensuring that you have enough stock of something, and it kind of eliminates the need for someone to physically go down, count something, or physically check a database, and then go through a manual process at human speed. Because obviously computers are going to do things at the speed of their CPU, and they're going to do things a lot quicker, and in most cases they're less prone to error as well. So it's largely quicker for them to be constantly checking the number of things in stock and then running that order process automatically when needed, so that the staff can focus on the actual physical tasks, which are moving the items around rather than worrying about how much they've got. So moving on from the retail space back into HR with payroll, or you could argue this is a finance process, but it's probably less bespoke than the employee onboarding use case we talked about. So payroll, again, is quite it's quite a popular automation area, although obviously quite sensitive, because we want to ensure that any automated process is not compromising someone's pay. We want to make sure people are paid the right amount. And it can fluctuate quite a lot as well, because you may have people who work shifts, or you may have people who are off sick or had holidays, lots of different fluctuating factors that may affect payroll. So this process is quite similar to the invoice processing use case, where usually you will have an entry point of data, like how many days somebody worked in a database somewhere, or maybe on a spreadsheet, like a timesheet, for example. And the bot will start by extracting that data per employee, and it can fill in different fields in your payroll software, and then the payroll software will obviously calculate how much someone is due to be paid, and then that payroll run can be executed. So there's not much to say on this one, other than usually for payroll use cases, it's either an API, which is going through the back door, and that's doing things without any visual automation or UI automation, or it's essentially emulating the clicks that you would take as the payroll person to click through your software and authorize payments for people. So again, using UI automations, you can see how this is quite possible. And maybe from what I'm saying with these different use cases, you're seeing that there is a pattern here, in that because we can emulate pretty much anything a human can do, the choices the options we have in terms of automation and their use cases are pretty much endless. I think these are some good key areas, but they're certainly not exhaustive. And so finally, one of the more interesting ones, one of the more interesting areas for use cases is customer support. And this has become a growing area for automation, particularly in the area of chatbots. So you've probably noticed when you go onto websites, there's a live chat button. And a lot of the time when you start that conversation, you're not speaking to a human. Now, when these chatbots first came about, they were pretty rudimentary. They were very much based on raw logic. But as time's gone on, we've come a long way. We've started to leverage the power of AI and what we call natural language processing. So the artificial intelligence engines that are listening to what you're saying in a live chat can interpret what is being sent in the same sort of way as a human. Not exactly the same, but pretty close, and this is becoming more and more prevalent in the automation industry. So chatbots are a really good way of providing initial support to somebody without the need for an agent to step in. And a lot of the time, if the chatbot's good, it can resolve an issue or point someone in the right place without the need for that human intervention. But obviously, as I said before, there's no such thing as automation without human intervention somewhere. I still believe there's a need for human intervention in most RPA cases, and just the same with chatbots. They're programmed to be able to pass people to human agents as needed. But the customer support area is not simply for chatbots. There are a lot of other automation use cases. One of the really interesting ones I find is sentiment analysis, and this is another area of AI that's becoming really useful in terms of managing customer satisfaction. So sentiment analysis is a way of taking in feedback from a customer and being able to automatically understand whether the feedback was positive or negative. The way we create this, the way we develop the ability to manage or to evaluate sentiment is by training lots of sample data. So this is where we train a machine learning algorithm to look over lots of different words sent in by customers, and then we will score each of the words depending on whether we feel they are positive or negative. So we would probably take the sentence, a TripAdvisor review, for example, the meal was awful, and we would take the word awful and we would score that as negative. And if you do that enough times, the machine learning algorithm will understand that word will score negative. And the same for positive things. The meal was delicious. The word delicious will be trained as a positive word and it will score highly. And so what happens after the training process is when you receive input in the form of reviews or messages or whatever that input may be, you've got a means of taking each word and scoring it against either a negative score or a positive score. And then the overall total is your sentiment. And so if you have a high sentiment, the chances are the feedback was positive. And if it's quite low, the chances are it was a bad review, or it was someone who sent the message in wasn't very happy. And this is very powerful because it means that we can automatically respond to customer satisfaction, or maybe more importantly, customer dissatisfaction. I've actually used this in a previous role where we were managing support requests. We had an algorithm that was scanning the messages from customers, and if we saw that the sentiment was particularly low, if it was below a certain threshold, we were kicking a bot in which would automatically email that customer to say, is there anything else we can do to help you? We'll escalate this issue. And so it meant that we were very quick and able to promptly respond to customer dissatisfaction, and ultimately turning that customer around and making them happier, which is not always easy for a team of customer service agents to do if they're taking a lot of calls. So that for me is probably the more interesting area of customer support automation. And with that, I think we've hit our 5 main areas of RPA use cases. There are hundreds more, and I'm sure that we'll go through more of them in a later episode. But until then, if you want to hear more about RPA, don't forget to head over to my website that's in the description, and my LinkedIn, all the different places you can find me. Subscribe to the show on all your favourite podcast feeds and give us a review. This should be on YouTube as well, so don't forget to subscribe to Nick Proud on YouTube. Give us a like, and I'll see you next time on the RPA Show.